Marxists made a tactical error. They took Marx out of this whole context. So, in looking at Marxism, people didn't look at how Marx evolved his ideas as part of industrialization. They looked at Stalinist Russia. By the 1970s, Marxists talked about it was a theory of culture. It was a theory of literature. It was a theory of language. It was everything except economics. Well, when China was redeveloping its economy 30 years ago, it avoided talking to Marxists. And there was a reason for that. Marxism had become irrelevant 30 years ago, because not because Marx was irrelevant, but because Marxists were irrelevant. The whole Marxist movement became something very different from Marx. And my approach to Marx in the 1960s was to study classical economics. What happened in the 19th century? How did countries take off in the Industrial Revolution, and what was the logic of the Industrial Revolution? It began to be filled out by the French physiocrats, by Adam Smith, based on you want to get rid of the landlord class, you don't want a land rent, you want that to be land should be a public utility, and the rent should be collected by the state. You had David Ricardo describing rent as unearned income, and the ideal of capitalism was to get rid of the unnecessary costs of production. And this was land rent, natural resource rent, monopoly rent, and predatory banking interest. And John Stuart Mill, the whole 19th century was discussing all of this. Well, Marxists made a tactical error. They took Marx out of this whole context. So, in looking at Marxism, people didn't look at how Marx evolved his ideas as part of industrialization. They looked at Stalinist Russia. I'm not a Stalinist. I'm a classical economist. And I think if the Chinese students were to say, what was classical economics all about? How did Europe and America industrialize? And how did Marx actually was the culmination of this whole classical economics from Adam Smith on? Well, you've had in the United States a misrepresentation, a rewriting of what Adam Smith was all about. My book, J is for Junk Economics, or language, a language is and the language of economic deception. There's been in the West, a rewriting of classical economics as if it was all right wing. Anti-Marxist instead of leading to Marxism. So I think the most important thing for Chinese students to do would say, how do we put Marx in the context of Western development, and why were the advocates of Western development and the original advocates, Lenin of Russia, was following this? Where did Russia go wrong? How did the Stalinist idea, I should say, not Russian, the Stalinist idea, how did that dumb down Marxism? And what was Marxism really about? By the 1970s, Marxists talked about it was a theory of culture. It was a theory of literature. It was a theory of language. It was everything except economics. So the revolutionary thought to China is Marx was actually an economist. That's what he was writing about. And he was writing about capital, and he was an economic historian. I think there's no discussion in the West of either economic history or the history of economic thought anymore. And this has become embarrassing to neoliberalism that the United States have. So I think if the Chinese realize that Europe, that England and English political economy and the American school of American political economy were actually progressive, leading towards socialism, leading towards Marxism. Marxism while Marx was alive was a completely different thing than Marxism as it became today, which is sort of a bourgeois literary criticism. What were Marx's ideas and how did he analyze the laws of motion of capitalism and the laws of motion of the economy? And above all, how did volumes 2 and 3 of Capital and Marx's history of economic doctrines, his theories of surplus value, how did Marx distinguish productive investment, what he called the sphere of production, production and consumption, from the sphere of circulation, finance, real estate, and monopolies and the rent. What Marx dealt with was how does capitalism cut costs to become more efficient and free its economies from the rentier classes, the rent-seeking classes, the landlords, the monopolists, and the banks. How does it do that? That's the question that the global majority have to decide today in creating a system that is not favoring the financialized the banks controlling it. You don't want to create a new brick system where the banks run everything. And Marx gave the argument for how to avoid that. More than anyone else, Marx talked about the problem of banking and the problem of debt. And in America, it was Marxists who developed modern monetary theory, such as I taught at the University of Missouri in Kansas City, and the whole faculty of Kansas City taught. Randall Ray, Stephanie Kelton. There's a huge literature on modern monetary theory, and all of that comes from Marxism. But the people who call themselves Marxists don't discuss it. The people who call themselves Marxists, it's like a literature club. It doesn't discuss economics. So you need understanding of Western economic history and where it went wrong. I'm usually called a Marxist because I grew up in a Marxist family. And when I went to work in Wall Street, all the leading financial economists were Marxists because we know what surplus value was. We know that the system's all about exploitation. And if you go to business school and you learn that nobody's exploited, then you don't know how money's really being made. So that at least in the 60s, when I was there, Marxism was very common, although none of us had anything to do with the Marxist parties. I've had nothing to do with the Marxist political parties in the West. Even though my family grew up in it, I was studying, my approach was as an economist and an economic historian and a geopolitical advisor. I stopped calling myself an economist and called myself a futurist when I began to work for the US government and the Canadian government and the United Nations. And I realized that economists themselves weren't talking about what I was talking about. So neither the economists nor the people who call themselves Marxists were talking about this. And today, parties that call themselves Marxists are all sort of personality cults, very small groups around individuals. There's no interaction with the public at large or with governments or with the rest of society. It's isolated. And what I want to do is not so much revive Marxism, but the whole 19th century political economy of economic rent. Again, that's what my books are about. And I've just finished a history of the financial sector from the medieval crusades in the 12th and 13th centuries to outbreak of World War I. And I describe, this how finance untracked industrial capitalism. It was finance and World War I that pushed industrial capitalism into something very different and almost antithetical to industrial capitalism. And that's what China managed to avoid in the last 30 or 40 years.